A few days ago, the Ethiopian Jewish community here in Israel gathered together in Jerusalem to celebrate the holiday of the Sigd. It happens exactly 50 days after Yom Kippur every year, and it happens in the same place, on one of the most beautiful promenades looking over to the old city of Jerusalem. The holiday of the Sigd comes from the word Sgida or Siged, which means to worship. The idea is to complete the prayers of Yom Kippur with a prayer of the whole community together. Ethiopian observant people would also fast on that day. In Ethiopia, in each region where Jews used to live, or Beta Israel as they were called in Ethiopia, the community would gather together on one of the highest mountains in the area and would pray together with a wish to come to Jerusalem. So here in Israel, it's also a celebration of the accomplishment of the community that moved from Ethiopia here to Israel, to Jerusalem. So when did Jews first came to Ethiopia? We don't exactly know, but the Ethiopian Jewish tradition tells us that the first community came there even before the destruction of the first temple, more than 2,600 years ago. And this makes sense when you see that their scriptures doesn't include the newer scriptures that were created after this time, the Mishnah and the Talmud, for example. They focus on the Jewish Bible and later texts that were written in Ethiopia about it. We do have evidences of the communities that was written about them from their opponents. So for a long time there was an independent Jewish area ruled by Jews, governed by Jews, that were fighting against the nearby Christian empire known as the Solomonic Kingdom. And the Solomonic Kingdom wrote all sorts of descriptions and text about those Jews that were living there. So we do have evidences from a very early stage. The story of the Ethiopian immigration to Israel is one of the most unique and challenging ones in modern history. The first Ethiopian Jews came here already in the 1930s, but the main wave of immigrants started in the mid-70s, when small groups wanted to leave Ethiopia, and at the time Ethiopia and Israel didn't have any diplomatic relationship, so the Ethiopian government didn't allow them to leave. The Israeli secret services started different operations to try to get them out of there. A famous story is about a fake scuba divers resort that was established in Sudan to take immigrants that were fleeing from Ethiopia to Sudan through the desert in very difficult journey that many of them didn't survive, to get to Sudan to refugee camps, and then those secret Mossad agents acting like scuba diving guides were taking them in the middle of the desert, in the middle of the night, where all of a sudden an Israeli Air Force plane would land and get them out of there. In other cases, an Israeli Navy boat would come to a secluded beach and would take them out as well. But this was, relatively speaking, in small numbers. In those years, about 20,000 Ethiopian Jews left Ethiopia. Out of them, 16,000 made it all the way here to Israel, and about 4,000 people died on the way, on the different challenges of crossing the desert, of reaching Sudan in the first place. In 1991, an agreement was signed between the government of Israel and the Ethiopian government about getting all the Jews out of Ethiopia. We had to pay a bribe of $31 million. Most of that money was donated by Jews from North America to try to make this thing happen. And then in the 1990s, simply Israeli airplanes landed in Addis Ababa and took almost all of them out and over here to get to Israel. The story of the Ethiopian immigration to Israel wasn't easy. When we compare it to the other big wave of immigration, the former Soviet Union, in those years about 1 million Russian Jews came from the former Soviet Union countries to Israel. And when we compare those two waves of immigration, we have huge differences. While the Russian Jews came from a country that is not the West, but is Westerner in their way of thinking, in the way they used to live, in universities, in using Western infrastructure, the Ethiopian Jews came from rural villages up on mountains, around 6,000 feet up and more. They were living in simple mud and straw huts. They were all farmers, And that made it very, very difficult to get used to life here. When you think about the fact that most of them never saw a Western toilet before, didn't use electricity, didn't saw television, the whole culture had to change in many, many ways. So the youngsters got the hang of it relatively quickly, but what about the elderly one, the one that lived all their mature life in that rural village in Ethiopia, and then they came here and had to get used to something that is completely, completely different. Wasn't easy. And there is a lot of criticism on the Israeli government for not fully understanding the unique needs and necessities of the community in their first years, and that even made it more difficult than what it was. Another difficulty came from the way the whole community changed in Ethiopia, in the village. For example, if you had a question to ask, you would go to the elderly people, to your grandparents that had all the experience in the world to know what's the right thing to do in what time. But here in Israel, all of a sudden, those elderly people had no idea how the language goes, how you go to get social security, how you find the right line in the hospital or whatever else. And all of a sudden, it created a big shake in the structure of the community, in the structure of the family. And that took years to resettle in a way that would be more stable and healthy. So now we are more than 30 years after that big wave of immigration. You can say that all the youngsters now that grew up here, that served in the army, that went to school here already and they're fully Israelis, already the community, got fully in their place in the Israeli society. And while the elderly people not always are in the center of business, they have the right people around them to help them with whatever they need. Today in Israel, there are about 165,000 people in the community. Most of them speak both Hebrew and Amharic, which is the day-to-day language in Ethiopia. But here in the holiday of the Sigd, for example, the Ethiopian priests known as Kesses, Kes is the closest thing we can say to a rabbi, and there is also the Kes of Kesses, the high priest, the leader of the Ethiopian community in Israel. When they pray in Gez, in an ancient Ethiopian language that most Ethiopian Jews themselves don't speak. And that's why on the screens, for example, there is also the translation of the Gez into Hebrew and Amharic. It is a beautiful holiday and festival of the community. It takes place in many centers in Israel, but the most important celebration is here in Jerusalem. In this celebration, the President of Israel also comes to speak, and important leaders of the community. People are coming wearing beautiful white clothing. It's really, really special and fun to come and watch if you're ever in Israel during this time. I'm Itai, I'm a tour guide here in Israel. Thank you for watching and have a beautiful day.
Yeah.